They left their homes, walked to school, stepped into the night, and vanished. No note, no struggle, no second chance. These are the stories that refuse to stay buried, 33 disappearances that defy logic, justice, and time itself. Some were last seen on surveillance cameras. Others left behind only silence. But all share one chilling truth. They were here, and then they weren't. From haunted highways to locked bedrooms, this is not a list, it's a descent. This is 33 missing people mysteries that cannot be explained. And once you hear them, they'll never leave you. Before we dive headfirst into the unknown, make sure you're subscribed. This channel is your gateway to the darkest corners of history, one mystery at a time. And while you're here, tell us, where are you watching from? And what time is it right now? Midnight? 3 a.m.? Middle of the day, but it feels like night? Drop it in the comments. We read every single one. Kristen Smart. It was Memorial Day weekend in 1996 when Kristen Smart walked into a party at Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo. The kind of college party that feels forgettably normal: red cups, too loud music, people pretending not to care who's watching. Kristen, 19, tall, athletic, and vibrant, had come to the university with dreams that stretched far beyond the campus hills. She was a communications major with a knack for making others laugh, and she was the kind of person who looked like she'd be okay no matter where she landed. But that night, Kristen wouldn't make it home. She was last seen around 2 a.m., walking back toward the dorms with fellow student Paul Flores. Witnesses said she'd been intoxicated and needed help walking. Paul, who lived in the same hall, was the last known person to see her alive. He claimed he left her near her dorm and went to his own. Then nothing. Kristen Smart vanished. At first, her disappearance was treated like a college kid flaking out. Maybe she ran off for the weekend. Maybe she'd show up after the holiday. The hours bled into days, then weeks. But the moment campus police took their time to file her as a missing person, something vital was lost. Urgency. The Smart family knew something was wrong immediately. Kristen wasn't flaky. She had no reason to vanish. Her belongings were untouched. Her bank account sat still. No one heard from her again. What followed was a quarter-century of frustration, false leads, and silence. Paul Flores quickly became the main suspect. Stories swirled his odd behavior, the black eye he couldn't explain, his violent reputation among women on campus. But there was no body, no confession, no definitive proof. Years passed. New cadaver dogs, ground-penetrating radar, soil analysis under Paul's father's backyard. Still nothing. Then came the podcast. Your Own Backyard, launched in 2019 by a freelance journalist named Chris Lambert, reignited national attention. It wasn't a cop. It wasn't a private investigator. It was a guy with a microphone who simply refused to let this story rot. The podcast peeled back layers, aired forgotten interviews, and put pressure where it hurt. The Flores family found itself under scrutiny like never before. In 2021, Paul Flores was arrested and charged with Kristen's murder. His father, Ruben Flores, was charged as an accessory for allegedly helping hide the body. The prosecution argued that Kristen's remains had once been buried beneath Ruben's deck. The jury believed enough of it. In 2022, Paul was convicted. In 2023, he was sentenced to 25 years to life. But even now, with the man in prison, Kristen Smart's body has never been found. Her parents never got to bury her. They got justice, but not peace. Paul never told them where she is. He never cracked, never whispered a location, never offered an ounce of closure. In a way, he stole Kristen twice, once from the world, and again from her resting place. A missing girl, a convicted killer, and still, an open grave somewhere. The ground may know the secret, the air may hold the scream, but no one's found her. And that's where things get weirder, because Kristen's case may be solved, but the next one. 4 men frozen in fear, 1 vanished into the forest, and a night in the Sierra Nevada so strange it feels like it was written by Lovecraft. Yuba County 5, Gary Mathias still missing. The Sierra Nevada mountains are the kind of place where stories go to vanish. Crisp air, tall trees, endless snow, a place that doesn't care if you survive. On the 24th of February, 1978, 5 men from Yuba City, a tight-knit group of friends with mild intellectual disabilities, climbed into a 1969 Mercury Montego after watching a college basketball game in Chico. They never made it home. 4 of them were found, 1 never was, and to this day, no one really knows what happened on that frozen, impossible night. The group was known as the boys in their community. Not kids. These were grown men in their 22nd and 32nd, but men with trusting hearts, simple routines, and a shared love of sports. There was Ted Weiher, Bill Sterling, Jack Hewitt, Jack Madruga, and Gary Mathias. Gary was the outlier. Diagnosed with schizophrenia, yes, but also a U.S. Army vet with street smarts and the highest functionality of the 5. He was medicated and stable. The others leaned on him. After the game, they were supposed to return home. Instead, their car was found abandoned in a remote part of the Plumas National Forest, 70 miles from their route. No one could explain why they were even in that part of the mountains. The car showed no signs of distress, no damage, no mechanical failure, and oddly, it seemed like the driver had purposefully stopped. The keys were missing. Then came the snow. The terrain was brutal, elevation over 4,000 feet, temperatures dropping well below freezing, and heavy snowfall that erased evidence in time. Search efforts kicked off quickly, but the boys had simply vanished into the trees. It wasn't until June, nearly 4 months later, that hikers discovered a U.S. Forest Service trailer, 20 miles from the car. Inside was the mummified body of Ted Weiher. He'd lived for weeks, maybe even 2 full months. Evidence showed he had wrapped himself in 8 sheets, used candles, and eaten sea rations from the trailer's storage. But hundreds of tins of food remained untouched. So did the propane tank, which could have provided heat. His feet were severely frostbitten, gangrenous, and still he stayed there, alone, waiting. Near the trailer, searchers later found the bodies of Sterling and Hewitt, both dead from exposure. Madruga's body was found a bit farther, partially consumed by animals. Only bones remained. All had seemingly died trying to reach the trailer, or, perhaps, trying to leave it. Gary Mathias was nowhere. To this day, he has never been found. His tennis shoes were inside the trailer, suggesting he might have worn Ted's larger boots to venture back into the snow. That implies Gary was there, alive, and chose or was forced to walk out into the wilderness. No one knows if he died out there, or if he didn't. And that's the thread that keeps this mystery alive. A group of men with no reason to be in the mountains, a car that stopped without struggle, a trailer full of untouched resources, and 1 man who disappeared like a whisper into the trees. Was it panic? Was it paranoia? Was there someone or something chasing them? To this day, no one has ever fully explained why they went up that mountain, and the person who might know the one who maybe made it out is still missing. Gary Mathias walked into the woods in 1978, and he took the ending of the story with him. But our next case never even made it to the woods. Just a single car crash by the side of a lake. No footprints, no blood, no signs of life, just an empty seat, a family's worst fear, and the deep water of Castaic Lake staring back. 2 stories down, and we're already knee-deep in the unexplained. If you're still with us, you're exactly the kind of person we make these for. So hit that subscribe button and join the search for what can't be answered. And while you're here, drop a comment, Where are you watching from? And what time is it right now? Are you in a dark room? Lights off? Volume up? Or sneaking this in while the world thinks you're doing something else? We want to know. Bryce Laspisa. The desert doesn't take people. It waits for them to give themselves up. On the 30th of August, 2013, 19-year-old Bryce Laspisa was driving south from Northern California to his parents' home in Laguna Niguel. He never made it. And what unfolded in those final hours has baffled investigators, broken a family, and built a timeline so chillingly precise and yet so wildly inexplicable that it feels less like a missing persons case and more like a slow-motion vanishing act. Bryce had everything going for him. A student at Sierra College, studying graphic and industrial design. He was smart, funny, artistic. But in the weeks before he disappeared, something started to shift. He gave away his belongings. His personality changed. He began drinking heavily. And he suddenly broke up with his girlfriend without explanation. On the surface, he was spiraling, but no one knew how far. That Thursday morning, Bryce told his mother he was coming home. He started the drive down the I-5. But instead of making the 6-hour trip in a straight shot, Bryce did something that would turn the case into a labyrinth. He stopped. He stopped for hours. He sat in his car near Buttonwillow, a tiny speck of a town in California's Central Valley. A roadside service technician who helped him with a gas refill said Bryce was calm, coherent, just, not in a hurry to go anywhere. His parents, growing worried, begged him to keep driving. He promised he would. He didn't. For the next 9 hours, Bryce's car barely moved. The same roadside tech saw him parked in the same spot hours later. No one knows what he was doing there. Was he thinking? Was he afraid? Or was he waiting for something or someone? Finally, in the early hours of the 30th of August, Bryce did move. He drove toward Castaic Lake, a rugged, hilly area north of Los Angeles. At 2:15 a.m., his cell phone pinged near the lake. 45 minutes later, his 2003 Toyota Highlander was found crashed at the bottom of a 25-foot embankment. It had gone off the access road at high speed. The rear window was shattered. Inside the SUV, his phone, wallet, laptop, and all his belongings. But no, Bryce. Not a drop of blood, no footprints, no signs of struggle, just absence, as if he'd been plucked out of the driver's seat by some invisible force. Search teams descended on Castaic Lake immediately. Helicopters, dogs, divers. They scoured the hills, the lake, the canyons. They found nothing. No clothing, no body, no clues. Over the years, hundreds of tips have come in. Sightings, hints, theories. Some believe he suffered a head injury and wandered off in a daze. Others believe he staged his disappearance, left behind just enough evidence to suggest an accident, then slipped into a new life. Then there are the darker theories, that someone picked him up that night, or worse, was already waiting for him. But in the end, all anyone has is a wrecked car, a gap in the timeline, and a mother who still checks her phone every morning, hoping for a call. And that's where the gravity of this case shifts, because Bryce didn't vanish into a storm or a city. He vanished into daylight, into search parties, into the middle of an ongoing conversation with his parents. He was supposed to be home by morning. Instead, he became a ghost. And from the wide-open roads of I-5, we head to a place far more claustrophobic, where a young woman walked out of a sheriff's station and stepped into thin air, while the people who were supposed to protect her just watched her go. Mitrice Richardson. Sometimes a disappearance doesn't begin in the dark. It begins under fluorescent lights, in the blinding clarity of official custody. On the 16th of September, 2009, Mitrice Richardson walked out of the Lost Hills Sheriff's Station in Malibu at 12:28 a.m., alone, without her phone, wallet, or car. She had just been released from custody after being arrested at a restaurant for defrauding an innkeeper, a strange euphemism for not paying her bill. She was 24, bright, college-educated, and deeply loved. And after she left that station barefoot and disoriented into the canyons of Malibu, no one saw her alive again. It all started earlier that day when Mitrice showed up at Jeffrey's, a pricey cliffside restaurant, acting strangely. Her speech was erratic. She talked about space, God, and Michael Jackson being alive. She ordered food, refused to pay, and told the staff it was because she was from Mars. The staff, concerned for her well-being, didn't want to press charges, but the sheriff's deputies arrested her anyway. Mitrice was taken to Lost Hills, booked, and placed in a holding cell. Her car was impounded, along with her purse and phone. Despite clear signs of mental distress, she wasn't placed on a psychiatric hold. She wasn't even kept until sunrise. She was released in the middle of the night into a remote industrial area surrounded by miles of wilderness. No transportation, no money, no contact. And then, nothing. By dawn, Mitrice was gone. Her family, especially her mother, Latisse, immediately raised the alarm. She begged the sheriff's department to search, to release video footage, to explain why a young woman, clearly in crisis, had been turned out into the wild with no resources. But the response was slow, delayed, defensive, as if they were more concerned with covering liability than finding a missing woman. The next sighting came a few hours after her release on a property several miles away, where a homeowner reported seeing a woman resting in his backyard. By the time deputies arrived, she was gone. For nearly a year, Mitrice's face was on every flyer, her name echoing through newsrooms and rallies. Helicopters scanned the hills, dogs traced her scent, psychics offered guesses, but no breakthroughs came. Until the 9th of August, 201011 months after she vanished. Mitrice's partially mummified remains were found in Dark Canyon, a remote, rugged ravine just 6 miles from the station where she was last seen. Her body had been scattered by animals. Her skull sat yards from her spine. Her clothing was missing. The condition of her remains made it impossible to determine a cause of death. And even the way her body was recovered became a point of controversy. The coroner would later criticize the sheriff's department for removing her remains before the scene could be properly documented. The official stance? No foul play. But ask anyone who's followed this case, and you'll hear words like cover-up, negligence, racism, and accountability. Why was she released alone in the middle of the night? Why wasn't she evaluated by a mental health professional? Why did it take 11 months to find her in a place so close to her last known location? There are no answers. Just a young woman who trusted the system and walked into the dark alone, and a mother still demanding to know why. And while Mitrice vanished into the canyons, our next case begins on a suburban morning when a teenager left home to catch her school bus and never even made it to the street corner, her backpack found, her phone silent, and her last known steps swallowed by the quiet roads of Morgan Hill, Sierra Lamar. It was an ordinary Friday morning in Morgan Hill, California, the kind of small town where big things aren't supposed to happen. On the 16th of March, 2012, one 5-year-old Sierra Lamar left her house around 7 a.m., backpack slung over her shoulder, and headed out toward her school bus stop. She never made it there. No one saw her. No one heard her scream. No one witnessed anything. And yet, within 48 hours, it was clear Sierra hadn't run away. She'd vanished. Sierra was new to the area, having recently moved from Fremont. She was outgoing, bright, with that teenage energy that can fill a room or light a phone screen. She loved makeup tutorials, music, and soccer. She had friends, plans, a future. That morning, when she didn't show up for class, her absence was noted but not immediately flagged. It wasn't until that afternoon, when her mother came home to an empty house, that the alarms started ringing. Her phone was found in a field just a few blocks from her house. Her backpack found 2 days later, ditched in the opposite direction. The phone's screen had been smashed. The contents of the backpack included her clothes. Not the clothes she wore that day, but a change of clothes, enough to prove she hadn't simply wandered off. From the start, it smelled like an abduction, but there were no witnesses, no tire marks, no clear path of escape. As if someone had plucked her off the sidewalk and vanished into thin air. Then came the DNA. A break in the case came when police found traces of DNA on Sierra's discarded belongings. The hit matched a man named Antolin Garcia Torres, a 1-year-old from nearby San Martin. He had no prior convictions, but his DNA had been entered into the system from a prior arrest. As investigators looked closer, the pieces started falling into place like a nightmare jigsaw puzzle. Garcia Torres worked at a local Safeway. His cell phone pinged in the area Sierra vanished. His DNA was found on her clothes, and in the trunk of his car, investigators said they found her DNA as well. The case tightened around him like a vice. In 2017, 5 years after Sierra disappeared, he was tried and convicted for her murder, as well as a string of attempted kidnappings of other women. He received life in prison without parole, a guilty man. A closed case. And yet it didn't feel closed, because Sierra's body has never been found. No confession, no location, no final resting place. The Lamar family has lived every day since, in that space between justice and the void. Her father held out hope for years, launching massive searches across Santa Clara County. Volunteers combed lakes, fields, and abandoned buildings. Drones and cadaver dogs were deployed, but Sierra remained missing. Her final location, her final moments, still unknown. It raises the question, how can a man go to prison for a murder when there's no body? How can a family grieve when the grave doesn't exist? And what did Antolin Garcia Torres do that day? What detail is he still keeping for himself? Sometimes, justice is a locked door. But peace? That's a key no one ever handed the Lamars. And if you think that's the end of the horror, wait until you meet Evelyn Hernandez, a young woman who vanished with her unborn child, leaving behind only a torso in the bay and a question that still echoes through the fog of San Francisco. Where is her baby? Evelyn Hernandez. San Francisco is a city known for fog, for freedom, for bridges suspended in sky. But in May of 2002, its waters swallowed something unthinkable and refused to give the rest back. Evelyn Hernandez, a 4-year-old Salvadoran immigrant, was 9 months pregnant when she disappeared. She had a 5-year-old son. She had a due date. She had a name picked out for the baby, Fernando, but one afternoon, she simply vanished, and what came next would haunt not just her family, but the entire Bay Area. Evelyn was last seen on May 1. She'd spent the day taking her son Alexis to swimming lessons. She was smiling, normal, fully pregnant and days away from delivery. Her boyfriend, who was also the father of her unborn child, was a married man with a lot to lose. But Evelyn wasn't hiding. She talked about the baby openly. She planned for the birth. She wanted a future. But on May 7, she missed a scheduled induction. That was the first real sign something was wrong. Evelyn wasn't irresponsible. She wasn't the type to leave her son unattended. She was devoted. Her family knew immediately. Something had happened. She wasn't missing. She was gone. Weeks passed. Flyers went up. Her sister pleaded on local news. Police searched but found nothing, no car, no wallet, no sign of Evelyn or her son. Then, on the 24th of July, a body washed up in the San Francisco Bay near the airport. It was Evelyn, or rather, what was left of her. Her body was decapitated. Her limbs were missing. She was decomposed beyond recognition. The only way they confirmed it was her was through fingerprints. But what chilled everyone more than the condition of her remains was what wasn't found. The baby. There was no sign of Fernando. No umbilical cord, no bones, no infant remains of any kind. That detail twisted the case from a murder into something far more surreal. What kind of killer removes a fully developed fetus, disposes of the mother, and leaves no trace of the child? Theories spiraled. Was the baby taken alive? Sold? Hidden? Or did something darker happen? Evelyn's case, brutal as it was, never fully became a priority. Unlike other high-profile missing pregnant women like Lottie Peterson, Evelyn's story faded fast from the national spotlight. Her race, her immigration status, her socio-economic background. It all added up to one thing: less media, less pressure, less urgency. Her boyfriend, the married man with a motive, was questioned but never charged. He wasn't helpful. He lawyered up. And without a crime scene, a weapon, or conclusive forensics, the case stalled, technically open, functionally cold. But how does a pregnant woman simply vanish? How does her torso end up in the bay without a single clue as to who did it or what happened to the baby? Fernando would be 23 today, if he survived. Old enough to vote, old enough to ask who he is, but no one knows if he ever drew a breath outside the womb. And Evelyn's mother still wonders every single day if someone out there knows the truth. What's worse than a body that comes back without a head? A child who never comes back at all. And speaking of headless mysteries, our next woman left behind something even eerier than a corpse. She left behind a note, a purse, a fading Hollywood smile, and an unsolved disappearance that reads like noir fiction: the vanishing of Jean Spangler. Jean Spangler. Los Angeles, 1949. The golden age of Hollywood. The streets are slick with ambition and cigarettes. Glamour drips from marquees, and lies hide behind every smile. That's the city Jean Spangler disappeared into head-first heels, on lips painted. She was 26 years old, a working actress, a dancer, a single mother trying to carve out a place in a world that offered flash but no mercy. On the evening of the 7th of October, Jean kissed her 5-year-old daughter goodbye and told her sister-in-law she was going to meet her ex-husband to discuss child support, then to a film shoot that night. She left her house dressed in slacks, heels, and a white blouse. She never came back. The next morning, her purse was found in Griffith Park, one of the largest urban parks in the country, a sprawling maze of trails and shadows. The handle was broken, as if it had been yanked or tossed. Inside was a cryptic note, unfinished, written in looping script on a piece of paper. Kirk, can't wait any longer. Going to see Dr. Scott. It will work best this way while Mother is away. That note is the epicenter of the mystery. Kirk? Dr. Scott? What exactly was going to work best? Let's start with the obvious suspect, her ex-husband. They had a contentious divorce, and custody of their daughter was still hotly debated. But he claimed he hadn't seen her in weeks, and he had an alibi. No physical evidence ever tied him to her disappearance. Then the attention shifted to Kirk. At the time, Jean was rumored to be dating a well-known actor, one Kirk Douglas. Yes, that Kirk Douglas. He denied ever knowing her, then later admitted to meeting her briefly on a movie set. A strange reversal, and one that's kept amateur sleuths whispering ever since. Could Kirk in the note have been him? Or someone else entirely? Then there was the other name, Dr. Scott. At the time, Los Angeles was known for its network of underground abortionists. Abortion was illegal, dangerous, and often performed in motel rooms and back rooms under filthy conditions. Jean's friend would later say she believed Jean was pregnant, that she was considering taking care of it, and that she had mentioned a doctor named Scott. But no such doctor was ever found. Jean's career was going nowhere fast. She worked as an extra. She danced at clubs. She was seen with men who wore nicer shoes than they had names. Was she swept into something darker? A mob connection? A Hollywood cover-up? She ran with some dangerous crowds, according to rumors, names that opened doors and shut mouths. The LAPD followed dead ends for months. No body, no screams, just that note, that purse, and a growing silence. Jean's daughter was raised by her aunt. Her name became a trivia question. A ghost in a town full of them. But maybe the most chilling part is the feeling that Jean didn't vanish in a moment of chaos, but in a plan gone wrong. A back alley procedure, a secret rendezvous, a name dropped in ink but never in conversation. Hollywood forgot her. But that note? That's the hook. That's the thread. Because the mystery of Jean Spangler still isn't buried. It's just resting, mouth open, in the hills above Sunset Boulevard. And just down the coast, in a quieter town with less glitter and more shadows, another woman vanished. But this one left behind a stalker's voice, a phone that wouldn't stop ringing, and bones that wouldn't be found for 4 long years. Her name was Dorothy Jane Scott. Dorothy Jane Scott. Before she vanished, Dorothy Jane Scott already knew someone was watching her. It started with phone calls. Anonymous, persistent, and terrifying. A man whispering about how he loved her, how he watched her every day, how he was going to get her. The voice shifted from affection to rage, without warning, one day romantic, the next day violent. Dorothy had never seen him, but he seemed to know everything. What she wore, where she went, who she talked to. He even said he would kill her, and no one would ever find her. And then he did exactly that. Dorothy was a 2-year-old single mother living in Anaheim, California. She worked as a secretary for a head shop connected to a psychedelic bookstore. She lived quietly, devoted to her 4-year-old son, Sean. No wild social life, no known enemies, just long hours at work and longer hours worrying about the calls, she told her parents. She considered buying a gun. She changed her routine, but she kept going. On the night of May 28, 1980, Dorothy was at work when a co-worker, Conrad Bostron, suddenly fell ill, likely a spider bite. Dorothy offered to take him to the emergency room. Another colleague rode with them. They got him checked in at UCI Medical Center. Everything seemed normal. Around 11 p.m., the hospital cleared Conrad for release. Dorothy said she'd pull the car around and meet them at the entrance. But she never arrived. Minutes turned into hours. Her coworkers searched the parking lot. No sign of her. Her car, a white Toyota station wagon, was gone. Her purse was missing. They called the police. At 4:30 a.m., her car was found engulfed in flames in an alley about 10 miles from the hospital. It had been set on fire intentionally. Dorothy was gone. No one had seen her leave. No one had seen the car drive off. There was no trace of struggle, no blood, no clues, just fire and smoke and a missing woman. Then the calls started again. Now they came to her parents. The same voice, the same tone. The man claimed he had Dorothy, that she was his, that she'd called him from the hospital, that he'd killed her. These weren't vague threats, they were detailed and frequent. He would call randomly, often when her mother was alone. Sometimes he said he'd buried Dorothy. Sometimes he said she was still alive. For 4 years, the calls continued, never traced, never caught. Then, on the 6th of August, 1984, construction workers found partial human remains buried near Santa Ana Canyon Road. A skull, some bones, and a turquoise ring one Dorothy had worn when she vanished. The remains were identified as hers. The cause of death? Undetermined. Too much time had passed, but it was clearly homicide. The phone calls stopped after that, completely, as if the killer had been waiting, watching the case, listening for the moment when her body was found, and then deciding it was over. No one was ever arrested. No suspect was ever named. But the killer had been circling her life for months, calling, stalking, closing in. He knew when to strike. He knew how to vanish. And he knew how to wait. Dorothy's son grew up without her. The questions never got answers. The voice on the phone was never identified. and Dorothy's bones, buried in shallow soil, are all that ever came back. But if that story sounds like the worst kind of nightmare, the next one may be even worse because it involves a child. A 10-year-old boy standing at a San Francisco bus stop in the middle of the day, who simply evaporated into the city fog. Kevin Collins. The 10th of February, 1984, San Francisco. It was still light out when Kevin Collins stepped out of basketball practice at Sacred Heart School. He was 10 years old, carrying a gym bag, and walking toward his bus stop on Oak Street. This was a routine he'd done before a short trip home to the house he shared with his 8 siblings. His mother, Anne, expected him back by dinner. Instead, she got a lifetime of waiting. Kevin never made it onto that bus. Somewhere between the school gym and the city sidewalk, a boy vanished into the noise of San Francisco. The police didn't move fast. Back then, missing kids, especially older children, were too often treated like runaways. But Kevin wasn't a runaway. He was close to his family. He wasn't rebellious. He had no money, no plan, and no motive to disappear. Just a jersey, a bag, and a quiet walk interrupted by something that still hasn't been named. When the seriousness of the situation finally settled in, the city mobilized. Kevin's face became one of the first missing children featured on milk cartons across the U.S. His black and white photo, big eyes, a soft smile, and a dark mop of hair became etched into the national memory. He wasn't just a missing boy. He became the missing boy. Tips poured in, psychics were consulted, canvases were done door to door. Kevin was allegedly seen in several locations, including a possible sighting with a man in a dark car near the bus stop. But nothing solid ever materialized. As time passed, suspects were looked at, then dropped. Rumors of a pedophile ring surfaced. Dark, ugly theories about underground operations in the Bay Area. Names came and went. Nothing stuck. Kevin had simply vanished, and no matter how loudly his family pleaded, or how widely his face was circulated, there was never a break. Years turned to decades. In 2013, nearly 30 years after Kevin's disappearance, the case roared back to life in a sudden, jarring way. Police announced they were excavating the basement of a home on Masonic Avenue, not far from where Kevin went missing. The home had once belonged to a man named Dan Therian, a known sex offender who had used multiple aliases and had lived in the house at the time of Kevin's disappearance. Inside the basement, investigators found bones. For a moment, hope flickered. The idea that after all these years, there might be answers, even horrific ones, was almost a relief. But the bones turned out to be from a dog, and once again, Kevin Collins slipped back into the shadows. The man in the dark car, the footsteps from gym to bus stop, the invisible predator who knew how to strike in daylight. Every part of this case is coated in mundane terror. A child didn't vanish into the wilderness, or the night he vanished into the city, into sidewalks, headlights, and indifference. And he never came back. But not every child who goes missing stays silent. Some cases return decades later, with fresh confessions, unexpected charges, and a murderer who thought he'd gotten away, until the police came knocking 32 years later, asking, "What happened to Michaela Gorecht?" 7 cases in, and already, reality's starting to feel a little thin, isn't it? If you're still with us, you're clearly built different. Hit subscribe so you never miss the next descent. And seriously, we want to know, where are you watching from? And what time is it right now? Middle of the night? Lunch break? Somewhere quiet? Somewhere loud? Let us know in the comments. Michaela Gorecht. It was the 19th of November, 1988, and the sun was still out when Michaela Gorecht and her friend rode their scooters to the Rainbow Market in Hayward, California. Michaela was 9 years old, smart, sweet, and fearless in that innocent way only kids can be. She had a smile that could uncrumple tension, hair like spun gold, and parents who adored her. The market was just 2 blocks from home, a safe enough errand, just a quick stop for snacks. It should have been nothing. The girls parked their scooters outside the store. They went in, bought some treats, came back out, and only one scooter was there. Michaela, being the brave one, went to retrieve the missing one. It was a few feet away near a parked car. That's when it happened. In one sudden, violent motion, a man lunged from the car, grabbed Michaela by the waist, and threw her inside. The passenger door slammed shut. The vehicle, a battered, dirty, tannish sedan, peeled out of the lot, tires screaming. Just like that, she was gone. Her friend ran back into the store, screaming for help. The police arrived within minutes, but the car and its driver had already evaporated into the California sprawl. No license plate. No surveillance footage. Just a description. White male, dirty blonde hair, mustache, 22nd, and a vague composite sketch that would haunt billboards and newspaper clippings for years. The case triggered a wave of fear across the Bay Area. Michaela's disappearance became one of the most infamous child abduction cases in the country. Her name was spoken in candlelight vigils, printed on T-shirts, whispered in prayers. Her mother, Sharon Murch, became a national advocate for missing children. Her grief turned into unstoppable energy. She never stopped searching. Every so often, hope would flutter. A potential sighting. A man who knew something. False leads, it all led nowhere. And then came the decades. The world moved on, but Michaela's name never disappeared. The sketch aged. Her mother kept writing letters to her daughter online, as if Michaela might stumble across them. The pain remained vivid. And the question never changed. What happened that day outside the Rainbow Market? Then, in 2020, after 32 years, everything shifted. Police announced they had charged David Misch, a convicted killer already serving time, with Michaela's abduction and murder. DNA evidence had finally caught up. New analysis matched a partial print from Michaela's scooter to Misch. He had been living in the East Bay at the time, already linked to other brutal murders. A local man. A familiar name. And now, finally, a suspect. But he didn't confess. He didn't reveal where she was. He didn't speak. There was no body, no recovery, no closure. Just a courtroom and the quiet confirmation of what her mother always feared. Michaela was gone. Murdered, but not forgotten. Her case was never just about one girl. It was about the cracks in safety we all pretend don't exist. The way danger sometimes drives a dusty sedan and waits outside corner stores. And the next story isn't any less heartbreaking. A little girl, asleep in her own home. A family, tucked into bed. A suburban night, shattered by silence. And a disappearance that ended in the worst way imaginable. Danielle Van Dam. Danielle Van Dam. It was the 1st of February, 2002, and San Diego was sleeping. In the quiet suburb of Sabre Springs, the Van Dam household was winding down. Brenda Van Dam had gone out for the night with friends. Her husband, Damon, stayed home with their 3 children. It was a typical Friday evening. A movie, a glass of wine, a few hours of adult calm after a long day of parenting. Around 10:30 p.m., Damon checked on their 7-year-old daughter, Danielle, tucked into her bed, asleep and safe. Or so he thought. By morning, she was gone. Panic set in instantly. Brenda had returned home in the early hours of the morning, sometime around 2 a.m. She noticed something strange. The garage door was open. An alarm light was flashing, a sliding door slightly ajar. But they were tired, tipsy, parents trying to chalk up weird details to forgetfulness. At 9 a.m., when Damon went to wake Danielle for her cheerleading event, she wasn't in her bed. That bed would become a crime scene. Police were called immediately. They found no signs of forced entry, no screams in the night, no struggle, just a missing child, a tight, well-kept house, and a rising sense of horror. Within days, suspicion fell on a neighbor, David Westerfield. Westerfield was an engineer in his 52nd, a quiet man who lived just 2 doors down. He wasn't a friend, but he was familiar enough to the family. He'd been at the same bar Brenda visited the night Danielle vanished. He left town abruptly the next morning, towing his motorhome into the desert. When detectives interviewed him, his story didn't quite fit. His demeanor was off, and most crucially, he declined to let them search his RV. Red flag. Eventually, search warrants were executed. What they found inside that RV was damning. Danielle's fingerprints, blonde hairs matching hers, traces of her blood. And on Westerfield himself, her fingerprints on his clothing, her DNA in his laundry. Still, no Danielle. The search dragged on for 3 agonizing weeks. Hundreds of volunteers combed the deserts, hillsides, and highways surrounding San Diego. Danielle's face was everywhere: flyers, television screens, candlelight vigils. It became the city's obsession. The kind of case that slows traffic and makes strangers cry at gas stations. On the 27th of February, her body was found beside a rural road in Dehesa, about 25 miles from her home. Decomposed, dumped, a child thrown away like she didn't matter. The trial of David Westerfield became a media circus. The evidence was overwhelming, his alibi shattered under scrutiny. And his cold, detached behavior only added weight to what everyone already knew: he had taken her. He had killed her, and he never offered a why. In 2003, Westerfield was convicted of kidnapping and murdering Danielle Van Dam. He was sentenced to death. But no justice system, no verdict, no death row cell could undo what had been taken. A little girl, a neighborhood's sense of security, a family's entire world. Danielle's room became a shrine. Her parents became advocates. The fear never really left that neighborhood. Because when a child disappears from her bed in the dead of night, when a familiar neighbor turns into the monster under the bed, it shatters the lie that these things don't happen here. And just when San Diego began to exhale, another girl, this one walking to school in Escondido, would vanish into the morning mist. Her name was Amber Dubois, and her fate would be tangled in the same web of darkness that claimed Danielle. Amber Dubois. The 13th of February, 2009. It was a Friday morning in Escondido, California. 14-year-old Amber Dubois was on her usual route to school, walking toward Escondido High with a backpack slung over her shoulder and a smile on her face. She had just received a gift from her father the night before, a signed contract to buy a lamb for her future agriculture project. She was excited. It was the kind of small, sweet milestone that sticks with a kid. It made the morning feel like it meant something. And then she was gone. She never arrived at school. No one saw her after she left home. No security camera. No passing witness. It was as if the sidewalk swallowed her up. At first, it was chaos. Her parents were divorced, and communication was rocky. That slowed the immediate realization of what had happened. But by midday, it was clear Amber wasn't missing by choice. There was no reason for her to run away, no behavioral issues, no history of threats. She was a quiet girl who loved animals and fantasy books. She wasn't the type to seek the spotlight. The entire day was supposed to be ordinary, but the search quickly became anything but. Amber's disappearance sparked a massive local effort. Flyers flooded the streets. Volunteers combed parks and trails. Tips trickled in but evaporated just as quickly. There were no signs of a struggle, no clues, no clear suspect. As weeks turned to months, the case cooled. And then, just over a year later, a name already infamous lit the investigation on fire. John Albert Gardner III. He had just been arrested for the rape and murder of Chelsea King, a 17-year-old girl from nearby Poway. Her case had rattled the region. She had disappeared while jogging in a public park, and Gardner, a registered sex offender, was quickly identified, captured, and charged. But as detectives dug into Gardner's past, they began to suspect he wasn't a one-time offender. There were too many coincidences, too many red flags, and soon he began to talk. In a plea deal meant to avoid the death penalty, Gardner confessed not only to Chelsea's murder, but also to abducting and killing Amber Dubois. He led authorities to her remains in a remote area north of Escondido, a stretch of land that had already been searched before. How he had managed to leave so few traces, how he had kept his involvement hidden for over a year, remains one of the more chilling aspects of the case. Amber's family had to hear the truth from the man who had taken her. It was an answer, but not a solution. There was no undoing it, no making sense of it, just a hard, bitter certainty. Gardner was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Amber's parents went on to become advocates for reform, for tougher laws, and for better systems to track and monitor dangerous offenders. Their work helped create Chelsea's Law, designed to increase sentencing and oversight for violent crimes against minors. Amber's name became more than a headline. It became a reason for change. But even now, her walk to school that morning plays like a still frame, one moment captured in time before everything fractured. A quiet street, a hopeful girl, and a future that was never allowed to happen. And from that quiet morning in Escondido, we head into the forests of South Lake Tahoe, where another girl disappeared only to be found alive nearly 2 decades later, in a story so surreal it feels like fiction. Her name was J.C. Dugard. J.C. Dugard. The 10th of June, 1991. It was the last day J.C. Lee Dugard would see the world as a free person for the next 18 years. She was 11 years old, wearing her favorite pink top and carrying a backpack, walking up a hill near her South Lake Tahoe home to catch the school bus. The neighborhood was peaceful, tucked between trees and meadows, the kind of place where a kid walking alone didn't seem dangerous. Her stepfather, Carl Probin, watched her from the driveway, just to be sure, just in case. Then a gray car pulled up beside her. J.C. was pulled inside. The car drove off. Carl ran after it, helpless. That fast, she was gone. The search began immediately. Helicopters buzzed overhead. Flyers blanketed towns. Amber Alerts didn't exist yet, but the media storm made J.C.'s face one of the most recognized in the country. Police combed the region. Her mother, Terry, refused to stop hoping. But the trail went cold. There were no sightings, no evidence, no communication. Just an absence that stretched into years. People moved on. Not her family, not the town, but the outside world. Her case was considered a long shot. A tragedy, yes, but old news. What no one knew was that J.C. was still alive. Just 170 miles away in Antioch, California, she was being held in a backyard compound, hidden behind fences and sheds, concealed under tarps and paranoia. Her abductor, Philip Garrido, was a convicted sex offender, someone who had already served time for similar crimes. With the help of his wife Nancy, he managed to keep J.C. out of sight for nearly 2 decades. She was renamed, isolated, monitored, denied a normal life. But J.C. endured. She found moments of light. She loved animals, especially the cats that wandered the backyard. She wrote in journals. She raised 2 daughters, both born during her captivity. In a world designed to break her, she held on to herself as best she could. Then, in August 2009, everything changed. Garrido brought J.C. and her daughters with him to a meeting at the UC Berkeley campus, an errand to pitch one of his strange religious ideas. A campus security officer noticed something was off. The 2 girls, aged 11 and 15, looked pale, confused, detached. J.C. wouldn't say who she really was, but the officer sensed the situation was wrong. That tip led to a deeper investigation. Within days, J.C. told the truth. Her name, her story, her years in hiding. The world gasped. A case long believed cold was suddenly alive. A girl stolen in broad daylight had survived 18 years in the backyard of a registered offender, and no one had noticed. The reunion with her mother was almost too emotional to process. It wasn't just a homecoming. It was a miracle wrapped in trauma, resilience, and unimaginable loss. JC had grown up in captivity. Now, she had to learn how to live again. Her story became a symbol not just of survival, but of how systems can fail and how strength can outlast nearly anything. She went on to become an advocate, founding the JAYC Foundation to help other families and survivors. Her voice, silenced for so long, now carries across the world. But not every case ends with a return. Our next story begins with a woman who faked her way into the headlines, a disappearance that sparked national sympathy until the truth came out, and the entire country realized they'd been watching a performance. Her name was Sherry Papini. Sherry Papini. On the surface, it had all the makings of a real-life nightmare. The 2nd of November, 2016, Sherry Papini, a 4-year-old mother of 2 from Redding, California, went out for a jog and never came back. Her husband, Keith, came home from work that day to find her missing, her phone and earbuds discarded along a nearby rural trail, her last known location pinged in the middle of nowhere. She'd vanished without a trace. Immediately, the story took off. Sherry was blonde, fit, all-American, a young mom from a quiet town. The press coverage exploded. Supermom vanishes during afternoon run. Candlelight vigils followed. So did search dogs, helicopters, volunteer teams combing through brush and empty roads. It felt like time was ticking away from something unspeakable. Then, 22 days later, something almost unprecedented happened. Sherry came back. On Thanksgiving morning, the 24th of November, she was found wandering alongside a road in Yolo County, over 140 miles from where she'd disappeared. She was battered, chained, bruised, thin. A sight so shocking it felt like a movie. She told police she had been kidnapped by 2 women masked, speaking Spanish, who had held her in a basement, abused her, and finally let her go. For months, the community treated her like a survivor of something horrific. Fundraisers were held. Sympathy poured in. Her husband gave emotional interviews on national television. The media followed her every word. People compared her to Elizabeth Smart, another miracle return. But behind the scenes, something wasn't adding up. Investigators quietly kept digging. The details of Sherry's story were inconsistent. The timeline was hazy. Her injuries didn't match her claims. And, most crucially, DNA found on her clothing didn't match the mysterious female abductors. Instead, it matched a man, an ex-boyfriend. In 2020, after years of quiet surveillance, the case cracked open. Federal agents confronted the ex-boyfriend, who confessed Sherry had been hiding at his place during her supposed abduction. She had asked him to pick her up in Redding, had cut her own hair, inflicted her own bruises, and lived with him for over 2 weeks while the world panicked and prayed for her safety. When it was over, she'd gone back home and lied to everyone. The motive? Still a puzzle. Some say she craved attention. Others point to financial trouble or deeper personal struggles. But none of that erased the truth. She had staged her own disappearance. She had lied to law enforcement. She had faked a crime that pulled in thousands of man-hours and public resources. In 2022, she pleaded guilty to making false statements and mail fraud and was sentenced to federal prison. Her story, once a beacon of hope, became a cautionary tale, not just about deception, but about how quickly emotion can override evidence, how a compelling narrative can mask deeper truths, and how even the most public disappearances can be built on private lies. But not all vanishings are fake. Some are real, and they never get a headline, let alone a miracle return. Like the next case, a young woman whose car was found abandoned on the Pacific Coast Highway, engine running, doors locked, all her belongings still inside. But she herself? Nowhere. Elaine Park simply stepped out of her life and into the fog of Malibu. Elaine Park. It was the kind of mystery that begins with eerie stillness rather than chaos. The 28th of January, 2017. Elaine Park, a 20-year-old from Glendale, California, spent the night at her ex-boyfriend's house in Calabasas. By all accounts, it was quiet. They watched movies. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that felt like a breaking point. In the early morning hours, security footage showed her walking to her car alone, calm, purposeful, and driving away. And then she was gone. Her charcoal gray 2015 Honda Civic was found 5 days later, parked along the Pacific Coast Highway in Malibu. It was pulled off the road near Corral Canyon, one of those winding, sea-facing stretches where the waves crash below and the cliffs stand watch like silent sentinels. The car doors were unlocked. The keys were still inside. So was her laptop, phone, backpack, and wallet. The engine was dead. The seat was pushed back like someone had reclined to rest or reflect. There were no signs of struggle. No footprints. No note. Just the Pacific, whispering like it always does. The last confirmed sighting was that grainy security clip Elaine leaving the house around 6 a.m., her figure swallowed by dawn. No traffic cameras caught her route. No witnesses placed her near the car. The hours between her departure and the vehicle's discovery remain a void. Elaine wasn't a person you'd expect to disappear. She was vibrant, artistic, into music and acting, a former student at Cal State Northridge, though she had recently taken time off. She had friends, a social life, dreams she hadn't given up on. She wasn't in crisis, at least not publicly. There was no build-up, no loud goodbye, just a slow fade. Her family, especially her mother, Susan, went into overdrive. Flyers, interviews, search parties. Drones and divers were sent into the canyon, into the brush, into the surf. Psychics were called. Private investigators were hired. But Malibu, for all its beauty, has a way of keeping secrets. The land is vast, the ocean is indifferent, and Elaine was never found. Theories multiplied. Did she take her own life? Did she walk into the ocean? Was she harmed by someone after parking the car? Did she plan to disappear and change her life completely? None of it made sense. Elaine's social media went dark. Her bank account sat untouched. Her phone activity stopped that same morning. There were no ransom notes, no pings, no digital crumbs to follow. It was as if the world hit pause on her existence, right after she turned the key in the ignition and headed toward the coast. The case remains open. Cold, maybe, but not forgotten. Her mother still speaks at vigils, still pleads for answers, still believes someone out there knows more than they've said. Because disappearances like this don't happen without a reason. Cars don't drive themselves to cliffside roads and get left behind without purpose. Sometimes, it's not the loudest vanishings that haunt the most. It's the quiet ones. The ones where someone calmly walks into the morning and the only thing they leave behind is a running engine and the sound of waves. And while Elaine vanished into the Malibu mist, the next case spirals downward into the depths of Prosser Creek Reservoir, where another teenage girl drove away from a party and vanished underwater, raising more questions than answers. Her name was Keely Rodney. Keely Rodney. The 5th of August, 2022, Truckee, California. A quiet mountain town turned epicenter of national attention when 6-year-old Keely Rodney disappeared after a party at the Prosser family campground, a celebration marking the end of summer for local teens. Dozens of kids, music, campfires, cars parked in a circle around the clearing. One of those cars belonged to Keely, a silver 2013 Honda CR-V. That night, she texted her mother around 12:30 a.m., saying she'd be leaving the party shortly and coming home. She never arrived. The next morning, panic set in. Calls went unanswered. Her phone was dead. The car was gone. And so was she. What followed was one of the most intensive search efforts in recent memory. Multiple agencies, local, state, and federal, joined the hunt. Helicopters scanned tree lines. Boats scanned the lake. Volunteers walked the woods and waded through reeds. A Find Kieli command post was established, and the hashtag number Find Kieli Rodney exploded across social media. But the more people looked, the stranger it all seemed. Kieli wasn't the type to vanish. She was smart, musically gifted, and well-liked, a student with college plans, a future already taking shape. She had friends at the party, but no one could say exactly when she left or who saw her last. Reports varied, stories contradicted. Some said she was intoxicated, others weren't sure. The party, attended by more than 100 teens and young adults, was chaotic. There were rumors of fights, outsiders, people who didn't belong, but no hard leads. For 2 agonizing weeks, the Rodney family and a community desperate for answers held on to hope. Then, on the 21st of August, that hope was drowned. Adventures with Purpose, a volunteer dive team known for solving cold cases, joined the search. In less than a day, they located Kieli's vehicle upside down in Prosser Creek Reservoir, just 14 feet underwater and a few hundred yards from where the party took place. Inside was a body, later confirmed to be hers. The questions only grew louder. How had law enforcement, with all their sonar and divers, missed the car for 2 weeks? Why was the vehicle found in a location that had supposedly been searched? Was this simply a tragic accident, or was something more sinister being overlooked? An autopsy later ruled Kieli's death an accidental drowning. No signs of foul play, no suspicious trauma, but the lack of clear answers left a lot of people uneasy. Her phone last pinged near the lake. Her friends had all left. Somehow, a girl who said she was coming home ended up beneath the water alone, undiscovered for days in the very lake where search teams had focused their efforts. There's something deeply unsettling about vanishing so close to where people are looking, like being lost in plain sight, like silence pressing down from above. Kieli Rodney became another reminder that even in this age of satellites and surveillance, the world still has blind spots, that even with a crowd nearby, someone can slip beneath the surface unseen, unheard. And just across the state, another teenage girl would vanish under very different circumstances. This time, the abduction was witnessed. There was blood. There was a suspect. But the girl Pearl Pinson was never found. Pearl Pinson. May 25, 2016. Vallejo, California. It was a routine morning for one 5-year-old Pearl Pinson as she walked across the pedestrian overpass above Interstate 780 on her way to school. Her hometown, just north of San Francisco, was like many others, quiet blocks, early commuters, and kids crossing streets with backpacks bouncing against their shoulders. But that morning, Pearl's commute ended in violence. Witnesses later described hearing a scream, then the sight of a girl, blood on her face, being dragged across the overpass by a young man with a gun. Someone called 911. One person tried to intervene, but the man pointed the weapon and kept pulling her toward a nearby car. Pearl was shoved into a green 1997 Saturn sedan, and just like that, she was gone. The suspect was quickly identified. Fernando Castro, a 19-year-old from Vallejo. His connection to Pearl was murky at best. They may have known each other casually, maybe through school, maybe through mutual friends, but there was no sign of a romantic relationship. There was no build-up, no history of harassment, just sudden violence and a missing teenager. Authorities issued an Amber Alert and began tracking Castro's movements through surveillance and technology. What followed was a bizarre cross-county road trip. Hours after the abduction, Castro was spotted in San Luis Obispo County, hundreds of miles south. He had ditched Pearl's phone. He was seen alone, no sign of the girl. but the car was the same. Then, in a small town near Solvang, he led authorities on a high-speed chase. He crashed, exited the vehicle, and opened fire. Castro was killed in the shootout, and Pearl was nowhere to be found. Inside the vehicle, detectives found blood and a small amount of Pearl's belongings, enough to confirm she had been there, but no clear signs of where she had been taken or what had happened after she left Vallejo. Was she killed before the final chase? Did he leave her somewhere in the vast stretch between the bay and the central coast? Or did someone else become involved after the abduction? To this day, Pearl has never been found. Her case hangs in that limbo that's somehow worse than confirmation. The suspect is dead. The only person who knew the whole story took it to the grave. Every search party since has come back empty. Every anniversary brings the same headlines, the same photos, the same unanswered questions. Pearl's family has remained vocal, refusing to let her name fade. Her sister, in particular, has worked tirelessly to keep the story alive, holding on to any thread of hope that someday Pearl might be found, or at the very least, that the truth might finally surface. Because this wasn't a subtle vanishing. This wasn't a girl walking into the woods and never returning. This was a broad daylight kidnapping in a populated area, witnessed, reported, tracked, confronted, and still unresolved. Pearl Pinson vanished not in the silence, but in the chaos. And sometimes, even chaos can't stop someone from disappearing forever. The next case circles even tighter around a broken family, a toddler gone missing while her mother's body turns up buried in a public park. Her name is Ariana Fitz, and her face still looks out from a wanted poster with the words, "No parent ever wants to read. Child missing. Suspect deceased. Ariana Fitz." The 1st of April, 2016. 2-year-old Ariana Fitz was officially reported missing on the same day her mother, Nicole Fitz, was found dead. That sentence alone is enough to turn the world sideways. A child vanishes. A mother is murdered, and the only thread tying them together is a shallow grave in a public park and a series of unanswered questions that get more tangled the deeper you go. Nicole Fitz was 32, a single mother doing her best to support her daughter while working at a local Best Buy. She had recently taken on a second job with a company called Care.com, hiring babysitters to help watch Ariana while she worked long hours. Money was tight, life was heavy, but Ariana was her center. Every coworker, every friend said the same thing. Nicole lived for that little girl. On the 1st of April, Nicole's body was found in McLaren Park, curled into a fetal position, partially buried beneath a piece of plywood. She had been missing for nearly a week. But Ariana wasn't with her. She wasn't in the house. She wasn't with family. She wasn't anywhere. She had disappeared days earlier, and somehow that detail had slipped through the cracks. The investigation turned quickly toward the people last known to be caring for Ariana. 2 sisters Nicole had met through the online babysitting network. They were cagey with answers, inconsistent in interviews, and according to police, failed to disclose when they last saw the child. One of them had even left the state soon after Nicole's body was discovered. To this day, no one has been arrested in connection with Nicole's murder. No charges have been filed in Ariana's disappearance. What's left is a case stuck between tragedy and horror. A dead mother, a missing toddler, and a community that still doesn't understand how a woman could be killed, a child could vanish, and no one could be held accountable. Ariana's photo remains on the FBI's Most Wanted Kidnappings page. Her image has been age progressed. Her name whispered every year by volunteers and advocates who refuse to let her memory be buried alongside her mother. And yet, all these years later, the trail is cold. No one knows where she went, or if she was ever taken far at all. Some cases leave you hoping for resolution. Others leave you fearing what resolution might actually mean. And then comes a case that shattered the illusion of suburban safety for an entire country. A pregnant woman, a husband with two smooth answers, and a body that surfaced in the bay. Her name was Laci Peterson. And her story was America's obsession. Laci Peterson. The 24th of December, 2002, Modesto, California. It was Christmas Eve, and Laci Peterson, 8 months pregnant with her first child, was supposed to be preparing for a quiet family dinner. She was 27, glowing, and ready to welcome her son, already named Connor. Her husband, Scott, told police he had gone fishing that morning at the Berkeley Marina. Odd timing, perhaps, but not immediately suspicious. By that evening, Laci was missing. The search began almost immediately. Her family knew something was wrong. Laci wasn't flaky. She wouldn't just leave. She loved being pregnant. She loved her husband, or at least thought she did. Within days, local volunteers and national media swarmed Modesto. Her face was on every screen, her smile imprinted in every mind. Then the cracks began to show. Scott Peterson's behavior was off. He wasn't visibly distraught. He avoided the camera. And then, on New Year's Eve, came the first blow. It was revealed that Scott had been having an affair. He'd told his mistress, Amber Frey, that his wife was gone before she had ever been reported missing. From that moment, public sympathy shifted. He became the villain, a national symbol of betrayal and suspicion. Yet still, there was no body, no crime scene, no conclusive evidence tying him to her disappearance. That changed in April 2003, when the bodies of a woman and a newborn baby washed ashore near the Berkeley Marina, exactly where Scott said he had gone fishing. DNA confirmed it was Laci and Connor. The trial became a media storm, wall-to-wall coverage. Scott's double life laid bare, his web of lies pulled apart in court. He was convicted of first-degree murder for Laci's death and second-degree for the death of their unborn son. Sentenced to death, later reduced to life without parole. But even with a conviction, questions linger. There are those who believe Scott's trial was trial by media, that circumstantial evidence and public fury overshadowed hard proof. Others are sure he did it. His behavior, his lies, the timeline, it all lined up too well. Whatever the truth, one thing remains. Laci never got to hold her child. Her family never got the future they were promised. And the face that once filled living rooms on missing posters became one more tragic image in a long line of women silenced before their time. And from one cold case headline to another, we now step back into the 1972nd, when a teenager walked out to wash her car in broad daylight and never returned. Her name was Christine Easton, and to this day, her parking spot is the last trace she ever left behind. Christine Easton. It was the 18th of January, 1971, when 9-year-old Christine Easton left her home in Hayward, California, with a plan as simple as they come: wash her car. She had a 1969 Ford Maverick, navy blue, and a weekend road trip to prepare for. She told her parents she'd be back soon. She never made it. The car was found later that evening at Charlie's Car Wash, just a few miles away. It was parked, clean. Her purse was still inside. But Christine was nowhere. No one had seen her. No security footage, no signs of a struggle, just silence. Christine wasn't the kind of young woman to vanish without notice. She was responsible, grounded, the kind of person who made detailed plans and stuck to them. Her family reported her missing immediately. But in the early 72nd, the idea of adult women disappearing without foul play wasn't treated with urgency. She was labeled a runaway, despite having no history to support that claim. Time passed. Tips came and went. Rumors flared and died. And the Maverick sat in an impound lot like a forgotten artifact of a moment frozen in uncertainty. In the decades since, Christine's case has remained open, but cold. Her name is still on the FBI's missing persons list. Her family still marks the date every January. There have been no credible sightings, no recovered evidence, and no confirmed suspects. Sometimes the scariest stories don't involve dramatic crime scenes or elaborate plots. Sometimes it's just a girl running an errand who disappears in a blink. No warning, no reason, no goodbye. Christine Easton walked into a car wash and left behind an empty driver's seat and a lifetime of unanswered questions. And from the vanished trail of a 1,971 car wash, we moved to another quiet town where a 13-year-old girl left school, headed home, and never made it. Her name is Eileen Michaloff, and her story has haunted the streets of Dublin, California for over 3 decades. Eileen Michaloff. The 30th of January, 1989, Dublin, California. It was a crisp Monday afternoon when 13-year-old Eileen Michaloff left Wells Middle School and began her short walk home. She had asked her mother earlier if she could skip her after-school ice skating practice. Her mother said yes. So, instead of taking the usual route to the rink, Eileen decided to walk the half-mile home. It should have taken 10 minutes. But Eileen never arrived. She was last seen walking along Amador Valley Boulevard, a familiar path in a quiet suburban neighborhood where nothing out of the ordinary ever seemed to happen. She was wearing a charcoal gray pullover, a pink backpack, and carrying her violin. There was no sign of a struggle, no screams, no witnesses who saw anything alarming. She was there, and then she wasn't. When her parents realized she hadn't come home, they immediately reported her missing. Police responded quickly, canvassing the area, checking her usual routes, and questioning classmates and neighbors. Nothing. No leads, no trace, and no body. Eileen's disappearance triggered one of the largest investigations in the Bay Area at the time. Hundreds of volunteers joined in the search. Her face was plastered on flyers, her story broadcast on news stations across California. Candlelight vigils were held. Still, the case remained stuck in limbo. No evidence, no motive, and no suspect. Her family never stopped pushing. Each year, they hold a walk and prayer vigil in her honor, retracing the steps she would have taken home that day. They've created foundations, worked with law enforcement, and even brought in private investigators. But decades later, Eileen Michaloff remains missing. In a case like this, time becomes the enemy. Memories fade, people move, hints rot into speculation. And for all the attention Eileen's case has received over the years, the one thing that's never surfaced is her. Not even a clue strong enough to build a theory on. She simply vanished into the ordinary, a place so familiar it should have been safe. And just 10 years later, another little girl in the same region would vanish under eerily similar circumstances. This time, the missing child would eventually be found, but not in time to be saved. Her name was Shiana Fairchild, and her story would become the first step toward catching a serial predator hiding in plain sight. Shiana Fairchild. The 9th of December, 1999, Vallejo, California. 7-year-old Shiana Fairchild woke up early, got dressed, and prepared for school. Her guardian, her mother's aunt, saw her off like any normal day. Shiana walked to the bus stop, backpack on, ready to start her morning like she always did. But somewhere between her front door and the bus stop, Shiana disappeared. When she didn't show up for class, the school called home. That's when the nightmare began. No one knew where she was. No one had seen her since she walked out the door. No witnesses, no obvious signs of abduction, just absence. The search launched immediately. Vallejo police coordinated with the FBI, media coverage exploded, and thousands of tips came in. Her face, a bright-eyed, smiling second grader became one of the most recognizable in the country. For months, the investigation surged forward, but every trail led nowhere. Hope began to dwindle. Then came the confessions, not from strangers, but from a man already in custody for another case. His name was Curtis Dean Anderson. Anderson was a convicted child abductor. While serving time in prison, he began bragging to reporters and police alike that he had kidnapped and killed Shiana. At first, no one believed him. His confessions were riddled with inconsistencies and self-aggrandizing lies. But he knew things no one else should have known, and eventually, his claims led investigators to a remote area near the Santa Cruz Mountains. In 2001, 2 years after she vanished, Shiana's remains were found, her identity confirmed through dental records. The truth was out, but it brought no peace. Just a name, a place, and a man who refused to give a clear answer about why he did what he did. Anderson would later confess to another child's abduction, one that didn't end in death. That child, Midsi Sanchez, had escaped and survived, but Shiana didn't get that chance. Her case changed Vallejo. It exposed flaws in early response systems, rattled the illusion of neighborhood safety, and showed how child predators could blend into the fabric of small-town life without raising suspicion. But her story also played a part in putting Anderson behind bars, preventing further harm. A grim legacy, but a meaningful one. Still, nothing could fill the gap left behind in her family's life. No confession could truly answer the why. And just over a decade earlier, in another part of the Bay, a young girl named Amber Swartz Garcia would vanish under even more mysterious circumstances. No suspect, no confession, and no final resting place. Only a jump rope. Only silence. Amber Swartz Garcia. The 3rd of June, 1988, Pinole, California. It was a warm summer day when 7-year-old Amber Swartz Garcia went out to the front yard of her home to jump rope. Her mother, Kim Swartz, was just inside. The kind of ordinary, trust-the-neighborhood moment that happens millions of times a day in America. But within minutes, Amber was gone. Kim noticed almost immediately. One moment, her daughter was in the yard. The next, she wasn't. No screaming, no car screeching away. Just a gap in time that changed everything. Police were called. Neighbors searched the area, and flyers flooded the streets by nightfall. There were no witnesses, no clues, no forced entry, no physical evidence. It was as if the air itself had taken her. For years, the case stayed open but stagnant. Rumors spread, theories were developed, and dozens of potential suspects were questioned. None panned out. Amber's mother refused to give up. She turned into a tireless advocate for missing children, joining the ranks of parents who channel their grief into activism. Then, in 2009, over 2 decades later, authorities announced a breakthrough. Curtis Dean Anderson, already connected to Shiana Fairchild's murder and Midsi Sanchez's abduction, had allegedly confessed to kidnapping and killing Amber as well. He claimed to have buried her body near a freeway off-ramp, but the confession came with problems. Anderson was already terminally ill when he made the statement, and the details were vague. No remains were ever found. The area he identified was searched multiple times, yielding nothing, and many, including Kim Swartz, have never fully believed his story. Still, police closed the case in 2009, officially linking Anderson to Amber's disappearance. But without a body, without solid evidence, and without a clear motive or consistent story, the closure was fragile at best. Her mother has continued to question the official narrative, and the community of Pinole still remembers that summer day with a kind of raw, unresolved ache. Amber's name is etched into California history, into the collective consciousness of families who know how fast a sunny afternoon can turn into a lifelong mystery. And so we move to the next case, not a child this time, but a college student in rural Northern California whose sudden disappearance led to a search that turned up more questions than answers. Her name was Alicia Ali Yeoman, and the river that gave her back gave nothing else. Alicia Ali Yeoman, the 30th of March, 2017, Yuba City, California. Alicia Ali Yeoman was 20 years old, a college student at Yuba College, known for her kindness, independence, and the kind of smile that people remember. That Thursday night, she left her friend's house around 10 p.m. in her Toyota Tacoma, driving away like it was just another evening. But Ali never made it home. And in the hours and days that followed, her simple drive turned into one of Northern California's most mystifying disappearances. Her phone last pinged near the city of Live Oak, just a few miles away from where she'd started. And that was the first red flag she hadn't told anyone she was heading that direction. Then came the second. Her truck was found 5 days later, stuck in mud near the Feather River levee, with a single tire missing, and her wallet and cell phone still inside. The driver's side door was open. The scene raised more questions than it answered. There were no footprints, no drag marks, no sign of a struggle or panic. No surveillance footage picked up anything unusual. Her family and friends were adamant that Ali wouldn't just walk off or leave without telling anyone. She had plans. She had no history of mental health issues. She wasn't the kind of person to disappear on a whim. For weeks, law enforcement conducted searches. The levee, the river, the surrounding orchards all combed through, but nothing turned up. It was as if the night swallowed her whole. Then, nearly a month later, on the 25th of April, a boater spotted something near the edge of the Feather River. It was Ali's body. Decomposition had made determining the cause of death difficult, and the coroner ruled the manner of death undetermined. Not homicide, not suicide, not accidental, just unexplained. This left her family in a new kind of limbo. Her mother, desperate for clarity, kept asking the same questions. Why did she drive toward the levee? Was she meeting someone? Was she being followed? Did something happen at her friend's house that hadn't come to light? There was no note, no suspect, no confession, just a young woman who left a house, drove down a dark road, and wound up in a river. The official case remains open but dormant, and despite social media campaigns and a flood of online sleuths, no new information has ever surfaced. Ali's story may not have made national headlines, but for her community and her family, it's a wound that hasn't closed, because rivers don't explain themselves. And sometimes, what they give back only deepens the mystery. From there, we head south to a mother of 3 who disappeared from her own neighborhood, sparking a murder charge without a body and a trial that still hasn't begun. Her name was Maya Millette. May Millette. The 7th of January, 2021, Chula Vista, California. Maya Millette was the kind of person who filled a room, a devoted mother of 3, a civilian Navy contractor, and a woman known for her laughter and her love of adventure. Her family said she was strong, determined, and fiercely protective of her kids. But on this particular Thursday, she vanished from her own home. It started quietly. Maya stopped responding to texts. She missed a planned family trip. Her phone went dark. Her husband, Larry Millette, told different people, different stories. She went for a walk. She was upset. She just needed space. But as hours turned into days, her family grew more and more alarmed. She wasn't the kind to go off the grid. Not without her children. Not without a word. By the 10th of January, she was reported missing. Search efforts began. Family, friends, volunteers, they combed through trails, canyons, and neighborhoods. Flyers blanketed the region. The Millette home was searched multiple times. What unfolded over the next year was a slow, relentless unraveling of the life behind the front door. The marriage, it turned out, was strained. Maya had reportedly spoken to family and friends about separating. She'd expressed concern about Larry's behavior. Some accounts described obsessive tendencies. Others hinted at control. But nothing, at first, seemed provable. Then, in October 2021, 10 months after Maya disappeared, Larry Millett was arrested and charged with her murder. No body had been found, no confession made. But investigators believed they had enough circumstantial evidence: suspicious internet searches, strange behavior, and what they described as an escalating pattern of threats and coercion. Larry pleaded not guilty. To this day, Maya's remains have not been located. Her family continues to organize searches, hold vigils, and speak to media in the hope that someone knows something or that Larry might finally reveal the truth. The trial, after multiple delays, is now scheduled for 2026. And while some might take comfort in the fact that charges were filed, that someone was held accountable, there is still no closure. No moment where the story ends with discovery or with peace. Maya's case is a portrait of the hidden fractures in seemingly ordinary lives, the gap between appearances and reality. And her story remains open in every sense of the word. From Chula Vista to the desert, our next case centers not on one missing child, but two little boys, two adopted brothers, and a disappearance that would become one of the most haunting criminal investigations in recent California memory. Their names were Orrin and Orson West. Orrin and Orson West, sincere and classic. The 21st of December, 2020, California City, California. It was just 4 days before Christmas when Trezell and Jacqueline West reported their adopted sons, Orrin and Orson, missing. The boys, 4 and 3 years old, had allegedly been playing in the backyard while their adoptive father gathered firewood. He stepped away, came back, and they were gone. That was the story. The Wests called the police. A search began almost immediately. Neighbors were questioned. Fields were scanned, but something wasn't adding up. There were no footprints outside the fence, no surveillance footage showing the boys playing, and perhaps most critically, no neighbors remembered seeing the boys at all. Not that day, not recently. As the investigation deepened, suspicion narrowed toward the very people who had claimed to be searching for the children. Law enforcement eventually announced that they believed Orrin and Orson had never been in California City at all, that they had gone missing far earlier, and that the reported timeline was false. In March 2023, after more than 2 years of investigation, both Trezell and Jacqueline West were convicted of second-degree murder, involuntary manslaughter, and child cruelty. Prosecutors argued that the boys had died under their care months before they were reported missing, and that the entire story was a cover-up. But even with a conviction, the most haunting detail remains. The bodies of Orrin and Orson have never been found. Their given names were Sincere and Classic, but they were known to the world by their adoptive names. Their faces became icons of the tragedy. Two small boys, wide-eyed and innocent, lost not to the streets or strangers, but to the very people entrusted to protect them. Their case is a chilling reminder that not all monsters come from outside the home, and that sometimes the hardest stories to hear are the ones that happen behind closed doors. From desert shadows, we now return to the water. Lake Piru, a boating trip, a child left behind, and a mother who never came back. Her name was Naya Rivera. Naya Rivera, the 8th of July, 2020, Lake Piru, Ventura County, California. Naya Rivera, actress and singer best known for her role on Glee, arrived at Lake Piru with her 4-year-old son for a quiet afternoon on the water. She rented a pontoon boat, signed the waiver, and headed out into the lake just after 1 p.m. Surveillance footage captured her walking toward the dock with her son in tow, life jackets in hand. By 4:30 p.m., the boat was overdue. A search team found it drifting aimlessly in the water. On board, her sleeping son. Naya was nowhere to be found. The child told rescuers that he and his mom had gone swimming. She had helped him back into the boat, he said. But when he turned around, she had disappeared, just like that. One moment, she was there, the next, she wasn't. The search began immediately. Divers scoured the lake. Helicopters circled overhead. The area was shut down, and teams worked day and night. It wasn't just another case. This was national news. A celebrity, a mother, a mystery playing out in real time with millions watching. Lake Piru has a reputation. Known for its murky waters, unpredictable currents, and steep drop-offs, it's not the kind of lake that gives up secrets easily. Over the years, multiple drownings have occurred there. Swimmers underestimated its depth, its still surface, hiding strong undercurrents. After 6 days of searching, Naya's body was recovered near the northeast corner of the lake, not far from where the boat was found. She was floating in an area with dense underwater vegetation. Authorities ruled her death accidental. No foul play, no drugs, just a tragic miscalculation in a lake that's claimed many. But what lingers is the haunting image of that boat drifting in silence, her son wrapped in a towel, waiting for help. He would later tell family members that his mom had used the last of her strength to lift him into safety before vanishing. Her death sparked discussions about lake safety, celebrity vulnerability, and the unpredictable brutality of nature. But for many, what defined Naya wasn't how she died, but how she lived. Fiercely protective, devoted to her son, a performer with range and charisma, and someone who, in her final moments, prioritized her child above everything else. From the still waters of Piru, we move inland, to a case that shattered a quiet suburban home where a family of 4 vanished without explanation, and when they were finally found, the desert held nothing but bones and a name etched in grief. McStay. The McStay family. February 2010. Fallbrook, California. Joseph McStay, his wife Summer, and their 2 young sons Gianni and Joseph Jr. lived a quiet, middle-class life in Southern California. Joseph ran a business selling decorative fountains. Summer was a stay-at-home mom. Their days were filled with school drop-offs, home projects, and dreams of moving into a new house. Then they vanished. The family's home was left in strange disarray. Bowls of food on the table, fresh groceries still in bags, their beloved dogs abandoned in the backyard. It looked like they had stepped out for a moment and never returned. Days passed, then weeks. The only real clue came from border surveillance footage, grainy video of a family resembling the McStays crossing into Mexico. Authorities speculated they had left voluntarily. But something about that theory never sat right. Family members were adamant. The McStays would never abandon their lives, their pets, or their financial security. Summer had been battling health issues. Joseph was busy expanding his business. There was no indication of distress or plans to flee. The Mexico footage, still debated. For years, the case lingered in limbo. A missing persons file, a family frozen in time. Then in 2013, nearly 4 years later, hikers stumbled across human remains in the Mojave Desert outside Victorville, over 100 miles from the McStays' home. It was the entire family, buried in shallow graves, murdered. Suddenly, this wasn't a mystery about disappearance. It was about execution. Attention quickly turned to someone close, Charles Chase Merritt, Joseph's business associate. Merritt had been the last known person to see Joseph alive. He had a criminal record. He owed money. And as it turned out, after the family vanished, he had forged checks in Joseph's name. In 2014, he was arrested. In 2019, he was convicted of 4 counts of murder and sentenced to death. The motive? Greed, financial desperation. Merritt saw an opportunity and chose to erase a family to hide what he'd done. But the McStay case continues to haunt, because for years it was treated like a voluntary disappearance. It was categorized, filed, dismissed by some. And meanwhile, a family of 4 lay in the desert, waiting to be found. From sun-bleached sand to high mountain rescue, our next case flips the script, where the ending came suddenly, violently, but not before a girl was taken across state lines by someone she thought she could trust. Her name was Hannah Anderson, and her survival came at a terrible cost. Hannah Anderson. The 3rd of August, 2013. Lakeside, California. 16-year-old Hannah Anderson had been picked up by a family friend, James DiMaggio. He was close to the Andersons, the kind of adult who had been around for years, known to the kids as Uncle Jim, trusted, familiar. But on this day, that trust unraveled. Hannah never returned home. What followed was a discovery that shook even seasoned detectives. DiMaggio's house in Boulevard, California, was found burned to the ground. Inside were the remains of Hannah's mother, Christina, and her 8-year-old brother, Ethan. Both had been killed before the fire. DiMaggio was missing. So was Hannah. An Amber Alert went out immediately. DiMaggio's car was spotted heading north, and the story went national within hours. Days passed with no word, no contact, no sightings, until a break came from the Idaho wilderness. A group of horseback riders spotted the pair near a remote campsite in the Frank Church River of No Return Wilderness, one of the most isolated areas in the continental U.S. Something about the situation felt off. The girl seemed subdued, the man overly controlling. The riders reported what they saw. The FBI located the campsite days later. A tactical rescue operation unfolded quickly. DiMaggio was shot and killed. Hannah was recovered, alive. In the days that followed, her survival became the center of the story. Some speculated about Stockholm Syndrome. Others questioned whether she had known more than she let on. But Hannah was clear. She had been taken, manipulated, and forced to comply. DiMaggio had planned the kidnapping, rigged his house to burn, and likely intended to disappear with her forever. Her escape wasn't just fortunate, it was miraculous. In a world of unsolved cases and children who never come home, Hannah Anderson's survival was a rare ending. Brutal, yes, but at least conclusive. She went on to speak publicly, cautiously, and with restraint. She became a symbol not just of survival, but of the thin line between safety and danger when predators hide behind smiles. And from a hidden cabin in the Idaho wilderness, we returned to a bedroom in Petaluma, where a sleepover was interrupted by a stranger, and a young girl was taken from the middle of the night. Her name was Polly Klaas, and her story would change the nation. Polly Klaas, the 1st of October, 1993, Petaluma, California. It was supposed to be a night of laughter, a sleepover full of giggles and innocence. 12-year-old Polly Klaas had invited 2 friends over to her house for a typical Friday night. They played games, talked about school, and settled in for bed. But sometime after 10 p.m., that sleepover turned into one of the most infamous abduction cases in American history. A man entered the house, not through some complex scheme, not by manipulation, but simply through an open window. He was armed and calm, and according to Polly's friends, he told them not to worry. He wasn't going to hurt them. He only wanted Polly. He tied the other girls up and took her, vanishing as easily as he came. The girls, once they freed themselves, ran to wake Polly's mother. The police were called immediately, and to their credit, they acted fast. Roadblocks were set up. A statewide alert went out. Petaluma was transformed into a command center, filled with volunteers, media, and search teams. The entire country watched. This wasn't just a missing child, it became the missing child case of the decade. Thousands of volunteers helped search the surrounding areas. Celebrities joined the public calls for help. Polly's face became a national symbol of urgency. Then came the break. 2 months after the abduction, a man named Richard Allen Davis was arrested for an unrelated parole violation. But he had a record, a violent one. Police grew suspicious. Then they found something in his car, items that tied him to the scene of Polly's abduction. Under questioning, Davis confessed. He led police to a wooded area in Sonoma County where they found Polly's remains. She had been killed shortly after being taken. The window of time had been tragically brief. Davis was convicted and sentenced to death, where he remains on death row. But Polly's legacy didn't end in that courtroom. Her case changed laws. It led to the creation of California's 3 strikes sentencing policy. It reshaped the way missing child alerts were handled, and it sparked a movement. Her father, Mark Klaas, turned his grief into advocacy, founding the Klaas Kids Foundation and becoming a tireless voice for victims and families. Polly's name became more than a tragedy. It became a mission. And from that terrible night in Petaluma, we drift next to downtown Los Angeles, where a Canadian tourist checked into a notorious hotel and disappeared in a way that still baffles experts and theorists alike. Her name was Elisa Lam. Elisa Lam. The 26th of January, 2013, Los Angeles, California. Elisa Lam arrived at the Cecil Hotel with a backpack, a camera, and a sense of curiosity. A 21-year-old college student from Vancouver, she was traveling solo through California, documenting her experiences on social media with humor and warmth. She posted pictures of bookstores, reflections on loneliness, and updates from her journey. The Cecil Hotel, located on the edge of Skid Row, had a reputation, not the good kind. Its history was dotted with crime, overdoses, and rumors of hauntings. But to Elisa, it was just a budget place to stay in downtown LA. 5 days after checking in, she vanished. Her parents grew worried when she stopped contacting them. They reported her missing. LAPD began investigating. They searched her room, questioned staff, combed through security footage. Nothing stood out until it did. Then came the elevator video. It was footage from the night she disappeared. Elisa is seen entering the elevator alone. What followed became one of the most infamous pieces of internet footage in history. She presses multiple buttons. She peeks out into the hallway, as if checking for someone. She hides in the corner. She steps in and out. She gestures strangely, some say playfully, others say fearfully. Then, she disappears from view. The elevator doors stay open far too long. The video went viral. Speculation exploded. Some thought she was being followed. Others claimed she was experiencing a psychotic break. Theories ranged from the supernatural to the conspiratorial. The Cecil Hotel's dark past didn't help. People connected her disappearance to everything from ghosts to serial killers to urban legends. For nearly 3 weeks, her whereabouts remained unknown. Then guests began complaining about the hotel's water pressure and the taste. On the 19th of February, maintenance staff discovered her body in one of the rooftop water tanks. She was found naked, with her clothes nearby in the tank. The hatch had been closed. There was no ladder access. No sign of how she'd gotten up there. The coroner ruled her death an accidental drowning. No drugs or alcohol were found in her system, but she had a history of bipolar disorder, and it was suggested she may have suffered a mental health episode that night. Still, many remain unconvinced. The questions linger. How did she get to the roof? Why didn't the alarms go off? Why did the elevator act strangely? Why that behavior in the video? Elisa's story became a modern ghost story not because of what was proven, but because of what couldn't be. It remains one of the most heavily debated disappearances of the digital age. And long before viral videos and online theories, another California girl found herself face to face with a predator. Only this one didn't end in mystery. It ended in a rare, unbelievable escape. Her name was Mitzi Sanchez. Mitzi Sanchez. The 10th of August, 2000, Vallejo, California. Mitzi Sanchez was 8 years old, walking home from school just like she did every day. It was a short route, maybe 10 minutes on foot. She was independent, smart, and already aware of the dangers kids her age were warned about. But on that summer day, danger came anyway. A man pulled up beside her in a car and offered a ride. She said no. He insisted. Then everything changed. Mitzi was taken. Her abductor was Curtis Dean Anderson, a name that would later be linked to multiple child abductions, including the confirmed murder of Shiana Fairchild. At the time, he was unknown. Just another stranger in a car. But Mitzi didn't disappear quietly. She didn't fade into the pages of a cold case. She fought. For 2 days, Anderson held her captive. He tied her up. He told her lies. But what he didn't expect was her willpower. Mitzi waited, watched, looked for patterns. And when the opportunity came, when Anderson left her momentarily unrestrained, she ran. Out the door, down the street, into the arms of strangers. She was rescued, alive. Her escape cracked open the shell around Anderson's crimes. He was arrested, interrogated, and eventually confessed to other kidnappings. He was sentenced to 251 years in prison. While he never gave consistent details about all his crimes, Mitzi's survival put a spotlight on a predator hiding in plain sight. But her story wasn't just about luck. It was about bravery. Rare, focused, instinctual bravery from an 8-year-old girl who refused to be erased. Mitzi would go on to become an advocate for child safety, using her voice and her experience to help others. She refused to let what happened define her instead. She turned it into purpose. And from that moment of courage and escape, we now travel back nearly a century to the first great American media mystery, when a celebrity evangelist walked into the waves of Venice Beach and sparked a scandal that still hasn't been resolved. Her name was Amy Semple McPherson. Amy Semple McPherson. May 18, 1926. Venice Beach, California. The waves rolled in, the boardwalk buzzed with life, and Amy Semple McPherson, America's most famous evangelist, walked into the Pacific Ocean and vanished. At 34, Amy wasn't just a religious figure. She was a full-blown celebrity, founder of the International Church of the Foursquare Gospel, faith healer, radio pioneer, and tabloid sensation. She preached to thousands at her Angelus Temple in Los Angeles. Her sermons were part Broadway show, part holy revival, filled with stage lights and dramatic flair. She baptized in white robes, spoke in tongues, and turned religion into entertainment. That afternoon, she had gone to the beach with her secretary and personal assistant. While they rested on the sand, Amy reportedly walked into the water for a swim and never came back. By evening, the city was in uproar. Had she drowned? Was she taken by the tide? Had she faked her death? All 3 theories were being whispered before the sun even set. Search crews combed the shoreline. Airplanes flew over the coast. Mourning ceremonies began almost immediately at the temple. Thousands of followers lit candles, prayed, and held vigils. The nation grieved a fallen star. But then, 36 days later, Amy reappeared. She was found in Agua Prieta, a Mexican border town across from Douglas, Arizona, claiming to have escaped from kidnappers who had held her in a shack in the desert. According to her, she had been lured away, drugged, and held hostage by 2 individuals who wanted a ransom. She said she escaped by crawling through a window, walking through the desert, and eventually finding her way to safety. The press exploded. Supporters wept with joy. But others, the skeptics, the investigators, the media, weren't so sure. Her clothing was clean, her shoes barely scuffed. Her account was vague, inconsistent, and missing critical details. And then there was the question no one could avoid. If it had been a kidnapping, why hadn't the church or her family received any ransom note? Rumors quickly circulated that Amy had not been abducted at all, but had instead spent those 5 weeks with a man, possibly a lover hiding out from the public eye, staging a disappearance to escape the pressures of fame or to cover up a scandal. A grand jury investigation was launched. Witnesses were called. testimonies clashed. At one point, hotel staff in Carmel claimed to have seen Amy there during her disappearance in the company of a man. Her version of events began to erode. Yet the grand jury ultimately declined to press charges. There was no conclusive proof she had staged the event. No smoking gun. And in the end, the public was left with two versions of the story. One of a miraculous escape, and another of a carefully crafted myth. Amy returned to the pulpit. Attendance surged. Donations rolled in. She resumed her place as America's most controversial and theatrical evangelist, now with a disappearance that only deepened her mystique. She died in 1944 under ambiguous circumstances, her legacy split between devotion and drama. To this day, her disappearance remains one of the most debated incidents in American religious history. Was it a hoax? A mental break? A real kidnapping? The answer may have gone to the grave with her. And with that, we close the list, 33 disappearances, each more tangled than the last. Some solved, some punished, some still echoing across the years, but all bound by one unsettling truth. People can vanish, from sidewalks, from bedrooms, from beaches, from the middle of the day, and sometimes they never come back.